Right. Feeling worse due to addictions no longer being met. So when I face a personal truth, why do I often feel worse as a result of my addictions not being met?
Well, I think it probably would be quite clear if a person was educated about their addictions, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Like the purpose of addiction is to avoid some underlying emotion or to get some emotion that you feel is devoid within yourself. So in other words, you're trying to avoid something that you don't want to feel, or you're trying to get something from someone else that you do want to feel and that you don't feel. So either way, the addiction is motivated by a selfish desire to have other people either make your feelings go away or to make you have good feelings or feelings you define as good.
Yeah.
And these addictions, whether they're physical, like drugs, alcohol, eating, food, sex, whatever, or spiritual with regard to love, what we'd call our love addictions, you need me, I need you, those kind of things. Or with regard to just general moral issues like ethics and morality, whatever the addictions are relating to, we are very focused on maintaining them because they all prevent us from feeling things that God feels we need to feel and get rid of, but that we do not want to feel or experience. And we have the concept in our mind and our concept in our feelings that if we felt them, it would be the end of our world.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to feel them. Or we have a concept in our mind that if other people didn't give us what we wanted, it would be the end of our world. And we don't want to feel that. And so we're heavily emotionally invested in avoiding awareness of our addictions.
Yes.
So let's say someone tells us the truth about our addictions.
Obviously, that's immediately going to feel uncomfortable because we think it's the end of the world.
It's the end of our world as we know it.
So the unpleasant feelings can often be fear. They can be a feeling like I'm never going to be happy again if I don't get my addiction met.
Yeah, fear, a desire for happiness that you haven't got.
Yep.
It can be even like worth, attention, approval, acceptance. It could be sexual related, sexual acceptance, sexual approval, sexual desire. There's all sorts of areas that could be triggered by us having to become aware of our addictions.
So you mean unpleasant emotions?
Unpleasant emotions associated with all those things.
Yes.
And when I say unpleasant, they're in us.
Yeah.
They're doing their damage to our body,
new.
to our health, everything.
Yeah.
But they're not new, they're old.
Yeah.
But they are damaging us, but we're just happy to be unaware of it.
Yeah.
And in fact, we even get diseases from many of these addictions in play that we're desperate to maintain.
Yeah.
And in fact, things like there are the diseases that are quite substantial on the planet, like cancers and stuff, that are all caused by these feeding of specific addictions. And yet we're totally happy to go through terrible chemotherapy processes even rather than address the actual underlying addiction because we're so desperate for the underlying addiction. We are willing to die with our addictions, literally.
Yeah.
And in fact, many of our, many deaths on this planet at the moment that are due to sickness and disease are deaths related specifically to the emotions associated with addictions.
Yeah.
So we're desperate for them. We're so desperate for them, we're willing to die to get them.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
So when someone comes along and exposes the truth of one, we go, what?
We feel like it's life or death. Almost.
Well, for many of us, we feel that way.
Yeah.
And hence we have a huge violent reaction to the exposure of our addictions.
Yes, and that violent reaction might be angry, it might be fearful, it might be desperate, it might be disillusioned.
Suicidal.
All of those things. But again, that's just exposing it's really fear that we're not wanting to feel about giving up that addiction.
Exactly, yeah.
And then sometimes I've experienced where the underlying emotion that I've been avoiding through meeting the addiction starts to surface. Yeah. So it's not just the fact of giving up the addiction that feels unpleasant. It's like, oh no, I'm actually really afraid here. And that doesn't feel like
now the emotion that the addiction was covering
Yeah.
also starts to poke its head out.
Yes.
And that's the emotion you're terrified of most of the time.
Yes.
And so now you're like, whoa, this is not feeling good now. I'm feeling worse, right?
Yeah.
I'm feeling worse because not only are my addictions being exposed and I feel a bit ashamed about them and whatever else, but now the underlying thing that I'm covering with the addiction, which is the thing I want to avoid, the emotion I want to not experience, I want to get rid of it and suppress it and keep it away from me. That very thing I'm trying to keep away through the addiction is now also poking its head through.
Yes.
Well, so now I've got, not only is my addiction not getting met, but also the underlying feeling is getting exposed. Not pleasant.
Not pleasant. That's right. So that all causes unpleasant feelings. And then there's also the other thing where sometimes not a lot of that happens, but the truth of our addiction is pointed out to us. We become aware of it now. And now it's like the increased sensitivity that we talked about earlier where, no, I'm still doing that. No, still doing that. And years can go past and we're just feeling more and we're feeling worse about the truth being exposed to us. But it's only because we're continuing to act in the sin and we're now more sensitive to the compensatory effects of that.
Yeah, the sin, you could say, is eating into our self-worth.
Yeah.
In other words, every time we sin, because we're now conscious of that sin, we're no longer in denial of it, it's been exposed to us, it now eats into our perception of ourselves. And therefore, we know that every time I take the same action again, I feel disappointed with myself somehow. And this is sort of like an eating away of ourselves almost, it feels like. So it's a very unpleasant feeling. You're far better off acting to remove the addiction than you are having that one. But unfortunately, the majority of people go down that track. And in the end, you can't even hardly look at yourself in the mirror, if you go down that track fully. But you still want your addiction met.
Yes. Yeah. And you might have faced the personal truth of it, but you still want it, and that you're going to feel worse then. Yeah,
so you see this a lot with physical addictions where a person, starts out with an addiction to drugs. They look in the mirror and they feel a bit disappointed with themselves and how they're getting haggard and whatever. And then over years, that drugs leads to some kind of immoral behaviour where they maybe even, go into prostitution or other things like that in order to get enough money, or stealing to get enough money to get the drugs. And every time they look in the mirror, they feel worse about themselves. And that's a natural result of the compensatory effects of their behaviour.
Yeah.
But they'd rather feel worse than themselves than they would face their addiction.
Yeah.
And that's, that obviously is going to feel much worse now.
Yeah. 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 Feeling worse due to the desire to sin remaining within me. So we're talking about when I've faced a personal truth, when personal truth is pointed out to me, I recognise it, but I still actually want to continue in the sin that's been pointed out to me. Why do I feel worse?
Well, before I look at that, why we feel worse, let's look at the dynamics here.
Yeah.
Here we've got this, the sin has been pointed out, the truth of it has been pointed out to me. To some extent, obviously, at least intellectually, I can see the truth of it. I can see, it's probably not the right thing to do, right? But there's a whole heap of, what causes me to sin? Well, there's a whole heap of emotions, desires and passions, and there's motivation within me, emotionally, to do it. Now, it's one thing for me to go, oh yeah, I do that. It's quite another thing to go, I don't want to do that anymore from a feeling perspective.
Yes.
Right?
That's right.
Now, most of the time when we come to admit that we do something, we have yet to go through the emotional thing of removing why we do it.
Yes.
So the why still remains.
Yes.
Now that it still remains, it is going to keep rearing itself up, motivating us to do it again.
Yeah.
Do it again.
Yeah.
Sin again. Sin again. And this desire to sin, now that it's exposed, is going to be bothering us all the time. And I desire to sin, but I haven't yet got rid of that desire to sin.
Yeah.
And so naturally, that's going to feel pretty uncomfortable. I'm aware, at least intellectually, that it's wrong. And so, I'm aware, at least intellectually, that it's probably not the good thing to do and that there'll be penalties associated with it and so forth. But on side of that, I haven't let go of the reason why I want to do it.
Yeah.
And that's going to keep pestering me like a nagging child, pestering mummy and daddy for a lolly.
Yeah.
it's going to pester me, you know. It's like a drug-induced addiction, you know, where it just pesters them. They can't, and in the end, you can't think about anything else than go ahead and do it again.
Yes.
And then you feel even worse because you did it again, and you already know, you know, that it's bad and you shouldn't be doing it. But I want to do it, but it's bad. And you get into this real, I suppose you could say it's an emotionally confused state where a part of you feels like you want to give it up, and the other part of you feels like, I want to fight for it. I want to keep it.
Yeah.
Very unpleasant. It sort of feels like you're tearing yourself apart sometimes in that state.
It's a very real, well, I relate to it so much, and it's a very real part of progression, is it not? I mean...
Well, it doesn't have to be necessarily, because if we get to the stage, well, obviously between the intellectual awareness and the emotional release, there is a stage, obviously. Yep. But you can go from intellectual awareness to desire to deal with the causes emotionally very rapidly. Emotionally. You can do that.
Yes.
Most people don't.
No.
Because the desire to sin is firmly established.
Yep.
And the seeming rewards for it are firmly desired.
Yeah.
And you have to give up the desire for those rewards or seeming rewards. You have to start to even see them as not even as rewards anymore. And you have to see, and actually, they're not even rewards. They're actually causing more damage to me in my life. And your belief systems have to change in this phase. And it's a very tricky period of time, actually, because you can change your belief systems quite rapidly if you're willing to feel emotion. But if you're not willing to feel emotion, it can be a very slow process. Yeah. So any person who is not willing to feel emotion is going to find this stage very unpalatable, very difficult.
Well, and long.
And long, yes. Because it's the willingness to feel emotion that releases the underlying desire to sin. Yeah. And unless you're willing to experience the emotions that cause the desire to sin, you are going to want to continue sinning even though you know that it's probably not the thing to do.
And isn't this really, though, one of the major purposes of compensation is to get us to that? It's almost like it sort of breaks down the resistance to that emotional state. It's the connection between our intellectual awareness. We can do that without feeling. But compensation is helping us to become sensitive to our soul-based experience, isn't it? And that's how it works for us, isn't it? That's how I see it. It's like, oh, there's the pain of doing that. Oh, there's the pain of doing that again.
But also the desire to do it again.
Yes, and you feel the play between the two.
And this is where it's very dangerous to enter self-punishment. You've got to instead go into this mode of, okay, I did it again. I'm not too happy about the fact that I did it again. I need to, it's urgent for me, it's an imperative for me to release the emotion of why I did it again. Yeah. And that's where I see most people fall down. They don't see the imperative of actually releasing the emotional reason for the cause of sin.
But that's where self-punishment has its own compensator, because basically you engage in self-punishment because you're afraid to do that, or there's a lot of reasons. I shouldn't make
there's hundreds of reasons again for self-punishment. Yeah. Many of them are to avoid the pain of the original emotion.
That's what I mean. So, it's the whole purpose for engaging it is to avoid the fear of experiencing the actual emotion that is driving the sin.
Exactly.
And but what you find is it has its self-punishment has its own compensatory penalties that get really extreme if you engage that really a lot. So eventually you do end up, it can take a long time, but you do end up realizing the pain I'm in and the fear I have of that other emotion, it's negotiable now, which one's bigger.
Exactly.
So eventually compensation leads
you back to that original emotion that you're avoiding.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's the workings of the law.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a grand law in that regard.
It is. I feel like it's doing so much for us. Yeah. Anyway, so
there's many reasons why feeling worth to the desire for sin remaining within me. Once I see the desire for sin within me, I often feel ashamed about the desire for sin within me. I often feel like
I'm still
ashamed that other people can see it.
Yes. I'm still reaping the compensation, as you said, because it's one thing to face truth. but the other thing to remove the desire.
Yeah.
And it's only when I remove the desire, even if I stop engaging the sin with the desire still in me, I'm just still going to be feeling more compensatory pain, aren't I?
Yeah. So there's other reasons too. It's like I often feel more self-conscious and conscious of what other people think of me.
Yeah.
Because I'm aware of my shame now. I'm aware of the things I'm ashamed of doing and the sin I engage all the time. And I become, sometimes, instead of just still trying to be my normal self, I try to modify myself in order to not feel that shame. And that's not a good path to go down either, because that's just generating facade.
Yeah.
And we've talked about that in the previous point we made. Yeah. So what we need to do is we need to go, okay, I do have this sin, and sure, this is going to be a bit of a tricky phase now. Yes. Removing this desire that I have to sin is going to be a bit tricky.
Yeah.
And the key is to persist with it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So there's a lot of reasons why that desire to sin, but you've touched on a lot of them there. And
yeah, perhaps one more I'd like to mention is the desire to avoid punishment from others. See, a lot of times we feel that if somebody sees us sinning and they know that we're sinning, that they'll now punish us with that sin.
Yeah.
And this is a frequent problem where people do that, unfortunately. Yeah. People in the world, when they notice that you notice something about yourself and that you're not too happy about it, a lot of other people start punishing you for it as well to make you feel bad.
Yes.
And that's a terrible process. You're far better off releasing the core emotion, because then you won't feel bad about it anymore.
Yeah.
And then when somebody says, oh, you did that, and I go, yeah, you know what I mean? You don't feel bad about having done that anymore. Yeah. You don't have that emotional signature left in you anymore. And that's a part of the forgiveness and repentance process. Once you go through the repentance process, you no longer have the emotional signature of what you've done anymore. And so people can point it out to you, and you'll no longer go into your corner and cower and feel afraid or try to prevent them from exposing it anymore. Yeah. And so you're less manipulated then. But in between that time, it's quite tricky. You feel quite bad about that.
Yeah. So there's a lot of reasons why this exposure of personal truth can initially feel bad, even though we are progressing from God's perspective.
That's right. Yeah. And we've got to keep remembering that.
Yeah.
If we can see something now that we couldn't see before, that's progress.
Yeah. Awesome. All right.